Good morning. This is Annalee Gulley. I'm the Director of Public Policy and Government Affairs for MHA of Greater Houston. We wanted to give you a little primer for the ins and outs of this legislative session and how the advocacy process usually works best. So let's go ahead and get into it. So here are the basics for the Texas Legislature and, the start of your Advocacy 101 class. One thing I'd like to bring up first before we start is everyone always says that whatever session they're in is the weirdest session they've ever worked. I can tell you, though, this 87th Texas Legislature is by far the weirdest that I think anyone in the Capitol has ever experienced because of COVID-19 and physical protections that needed to be placed to enter the building, and the number of people allowed in the buildings, the number of hearings held, the length of the hearings, and the fact that we're all, for the most part, meeting over Zoom really has changed the dynamic of how advocacy works. And it's been pretty stressful because it's really had the whole process shorten. And it feels like everything you get done, you only have time to catch your breath and start the next thing. But don't worry, these tips will hopefully give you a good starting point and a good understanding of what this usually looks like. Just be ready to encounter a few differences when you're actually in the building or online going through this process. So here we go. The Texas Legislature is a bicameral body, which means it has two houses, just like the United States Senate and House of Representatives. In Texas, the Senate has 31 members. The House of Representatives has 150 representatives. The legislature meets in regular session on the second Tuesday of January of each odd-numbered year at the Capitol in Austin. So the 86th session began in January of 2019, and 87th began on January 12th, 2021. The Texas Constitution limits the regular session to 140 calendar days. While we say just 140 calendar days, it's important to note that every single one of those days really means the body can be working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And you'll see that really coming into play the closer we get to sine die, which is the last day of the legislative session. The only required action of the legislature is to pass a budget. What that means, and it's kind of ridiculous in my opinion, that a legislature, it would be considered successful if the only piece of work they accomplished was creating the budget for the next biennium. We've put some useful resources to help you go through and make sure that you understand this kind of basic 101 of how you need to understand the environment in itself. You'll see those in the right hand corner, and we'll give you a little more information as the presentation goes on. So the Lieutenant Governor presides over the Senate. The Lieutenant Governor is elected statewide, and he is known as the President of the Senate. So ultimately, he determines which bills will be heard by the body, and also which members will serve on every legislative committee. So it's a fairly important role because the membership of a committee can really determine not only the prominence of the legislature during that specific legislative session, but also it changes the dynamic in terms of who makes the most sense to work with on a particular committee. And it's not always the same. So you constantly have to work on your relationships, continue to meet with everyone you possibly can, and try to have your bases covered in case there are additional changes that surprise you in the next session to come. So the Speaker of the House, who is Dade Phelan, the 87th legislature is his first session as Speaker of the House. So he was sworn in on January 12th. He presides over the House. The members of the House elect him, and he plays the same role as the Lieutenant Governor. So he determines committee membership and also determines which bills will be heard when, and how they will continue on the course and ultimately end up in a floor vote if they can get that far. So these are two individuals that you think might not have clear roles, but they dramatically influence the tone of the legislative session. Again, some dates that we want you to remember, as well as just a reminder of the leadership. So Governor Greg Abbott is the governor, and he presides over the entire body. The Lieutenant Governor, again, serves as the President of the Senate, and the Speaker of the House serves the same role, presiding over the House of Representatives. So total, the number of voting members in the entire legislature is 181 members. The Senate is comprised of 31 senators, and the breakdown of that, which has remained consistent for at least the last decade. The Republican representation, there are 18 Republican senators out of the 31, and there are 11 Democratic senators, again, out of the 31. This body has consistently been dominated by Republican membership, and thus really is seen as the more conservative of the two houses. In the House of Representatives, that's made up of 154 elected officials. The breakdown within this chamber is there are 82 Republican members and 67 Democratic members. So again, it is largely driven by Republicans, but there is a closer margin between the number of Democrats compared to the number of Republicans. So there's a little bit more give and take that you'll see go on in the House, and more opportunities to work together in a bipartisan manner to pass important pieces of legislation. We've broken down the bill statistics from the 86th legislative session. So this is at the end of session where we ended up in terms of bills filed, passed, and vetoed. This will also be dramatically different at the end of this 87th legislature. Last session, there were 4,765 bills that were filed in the House of Representatives. In the Senate, there were 2,440. And remember that the difference between the number of senators and the House of Representatives really does account for that disparity between the number of bills filed. The Senate is a smaller body and therefore files fewer numbers of bills. So the total bills filed last session by both chambers is 7,420. And that is typically the number that you'll see in a normal session. In terms of passed bills, of that 7,420, 1,339 bills passed. And that is also a pretty consistent ratio. So, we'll see that a significant number of bills do not pass out of either body nor the legislature as a whole. Typically, it's around 17 to 21%. The governor has the opportunity to veto bills passed by the entire legislature. So that's his final authority to actually weigh in and see which bills he wants to make effective at the end of the legislative session. So last session, he vetoed 56 of the 1,339 bills that were filed. This session is going to be very, very different, as I mentioned. There are significantly fewer bills being filed in both chambers. I think we are closer to 3,000 on the House side, but don't quote me on that. But it's a significant difference, and it's really changing the course of how business works. We're looking at fewer bills. Fewer bills will be heard before a committee, and we'll see fewer bills to pass on to a full vote, ultimately meaning fewer bills will be enacted following the 87th legislature. Just a little bit of mental health bill statistics that we've seen for the past sessions. One thing that we are encouraged by and really see as a positive trend, we are seeing mental health bills filed and passed increase during each legislative session. So the 84th was 2015 in blue, the 85th, 2017, and the 86th legislative session is the yellow column. So again, you're seeing a big difference in the number of bills that were originally being filed even as recently as the 84th legislature in 2015 to what we saw filed in the most recent legislative session. Again, those numbers will look different because of the number of bills filed during the legislative session, but we're hoping that that trend will continue to increase. You can see in the next set of columns, the number of bills passed is significantly fewer than those filed, but it has remained fairly consistent. And while we wish more mental health bills were passing out of both chambers, we are at least happy that, again, the number of filed bills are trending in the right direction, and the number of passed bills have been, on the whole, staying the same. Okay, so how does a bill become a law? These are the basic steps of passing a bill into a law. I will not lie to you. These are the basic ways of how it's supposed to work, but there are a lot of different things that can happen and contingencies that you should be aware of. So the first opportunity for legislators to file a bill begins during pre-filing, which starts this legislative session. It started on November 9th of 2020. We now, actually today, the day that we are recording this, is the filing deadline for the 87th legislative session. So this means that starting in November 9th, when the first bill could be filed, up until today, March 12th, all bills have to be submitted to Legislative Council to be written. You will end up writing the bills on your own, but you have to pass it through Legislative Council to make sure everything you do is actually legal, which I find helpful because I don't always know that I'm writing these things correctly. But so you have to get your bills sent to Legislative Council. You have to find an author to file those bills. And that is a big starting piece of this. And I would encourage you, if you are going to find a bill, to have a member file it. that you know will care about the bill, work on the bill, and someone who is either in your home district and therefore connected to your constituent base, or someone who holds a position either in the committee that you anticipate the bill will be heard, or, as a chairman or chairwoman of one of the other committees that exists in each chamber, because obviously as a chair, all of those members have significant weight and can directly influence how quickly a bill moves forward. So once you have your bills filed, every bill will be referred to a committee from the originating chamber. So for the example, the House has the Public Education Committee. In the Senate, it's the Senate Education Committee. And most of our bills this session do have to do with school-based mental health. So our bills will be referred to, in the House, to that Public Education Committee, and in the Senate to the Education Committee. This pretty much always follows this trend. So the subject matter of your bill will likely go to the corresponding committee, but certain factors can change the referral process in case if your author is a chairman of a specific committee, which the bill even loosely addresses, they can be referred to that committee because the chair has the authority to push that bill forward, and they might want to take that opportunity to make sure that their bill proceeds quickly. Once you are referred to a committee, you have to request a hearing. So that process is happening now. It's working a little bit different than it did in past sessions, but ultimately you want to get your bill to be heard in front of the committee. This does not always happen. Many bills die after being referred to a particular committee. So when I say they died, they just never get a hearing and therefore sit in that committee for the rest of session. When you get your hearing, you'll have an opportunity to put forward your argument and make your case for this, whatever bill you are working on, and why you think it is important for individuals within Texas, and what positive change that you're hoping to achieve. If these committees vote yes, either by a majority or by the entire committee voting yes, that bill has now passed out of the committee and will go to the calendar committee to receive a full vote on the floor. Remember, the calendar committee acts very similar to the initial committees you meet with, in that you have to work to get your bill to move from the calendar committee to a full vote on either the House or Senate floor, depending upon which chamber in which you are working. Once you have the House or the Senate do a full vote, if it passes, you have to go to the opposite chamber of the one you just passed out of and go through the entire process, mirroring that of the one you just went through in that other chamber. So if you're in the House, you file the bill, get it referred to a committee, get a hearing on the bill, get it passed out of committee, get it to calendars, get it to pass out of calendars, get the vote on the floor, and it passes, you end up going back to being referred in the Senate to your committee, requesting a hearing, and going through that exact same process. And remember, this all has to be done in 140 days. So your biggest enemy in the legislative session is always the clock. Things need to move as quickly as possible to give room in case your bill gets held up at a certain point. You have more of an opportunity to take the time you need to move it forward. I've actually gone through this slide So I've gone through each of these steps that need to be taken. I'll say one other thing, but this is sort of an advanced play. So don't worry about this if it is your first bill you're filing or if you're tracking a bill being filed. But one good way to efficiently pass your bill through both chambers is to file what's called a companion bill. And that's when you have one bill filed by a member of the House and the identical bill filed by a member in the Senate. That way, they can move through the process in each chamber, or more likely, you'll see one bill begin to move more quickly than another. So your Senate bill might be advancing more quickly than your identical House companion bill. So you might just start writing that bill out through the Senate because you think you'll get it finished sooner, and then you'll bump over to the House. But when you bump over to the House, you already have the bill in place, and you can look back at the history of going through the Senate and mirror those steps with the body being confident that the Senate has already approved it. So again, that's a companion bill. It's like next level. I didn't do it or even know what it was the first session I worked, but it's a good tool that we've been utilizing recently, and we've gotten a lot of success by implementing this strategy. Ultimately, even if you do get your bill approved by the entire legislature, again, it still has to go before the governor for a veto or for it to pass. The bills that pass can receive a signature from the governor, but they can also pass without any type of Senate signature, and just the fact that they were not vetoed allows them to pass. By the way, when they pass, they are typically effective the first day of September. So if you pass your bill in the 2 weeks following the legislative period, following sine die, and it is approved by the governor's office, most bills will be effective September 1st of that year. So let's talk about how to kill a bill. This is somewhat terrifying, and you really need to think through these steps strategically to do everything that you can to prevent one of these steps from happening. So this is doing the front end work to try to eliminate having to deal with any of these roadblocks that you very well could face. So run out the clock. This is a very common move, that if someone does not want your bill to pass, that usually a member, that member can delay how quickly your bill goes through each of the steps that we discussed. So, it's not great, but they can, a member can call a friend in a committee or a friend in the calendars committee and just say, I have an objection to this bill, and I would appreciate it if you didn't give it a hearing, or you waited a longer time to give it a hearing so it has less time to do all the steps needed to get it to pass. So they use the schedule against you. So again, as I said, time is your biggest enemy during a legislative session. Make a powerful friend. This can deal exactly with running out the clock. Usually the people that are able to influence other members to hold up a bill are very powerful. So you'll be working with a senior member of that chamber, or a member that holds a significant chairmanship role on one of the committees. There are also, other options where you can form a relationship with the lieutenant governor's office, who can delay the speed through which your bill moves through the Senate, with the Speaker's office, who can delay how quickly your bill moves through the House, or ultimately, you can work with the governor's office to ensure that even if the bill passes that you're opposing, you can try to stop it with the governor's veto. Thirdly, you can use old-fashioned persuasion or lack thereof. So a lot of times in the Senate and the House, bills are moving so quickly and there are just so many bills that a lot of offices don't necessarily read bills that don't directly pertain to their committee or their constituency. And they look to their other members in that body, usually of their same political party or, you know, of the committee in which the bill was heard. And they say, you know, is this something I should vote in favor of? It's something I should oppose. And they'll make their voting decision based upon these recommendations. So the more broad support you can get your bill, either within the House or the Senate, benefits you because there will be more members encouraging other members to vote for your bill, even if they're not directly engaged in it. So again, it's trying to create as big of a network of positive support of members in each chamber. So if a member asks about it, usually what they hear will be positive. Weaponized parliamentary procedure. I will tell you that last session I had, our MHA of Greater Houston had a bill that was very important to our author. We thought as an organization it would actually make a significant impact on funding choices and effectiveness for state-funded school-based mental health programs. And because we got passed to the local calendar, which means that basically all of the bills on local have been written off by the committee saying, this is a safe bill. You're not going to have any trouble with it. It's not going to make waves. It's, you know, we're telling you to go ahead and pass it. And so that's a great place to end up. The problem with going to local is that the only way that you can block a bill on the local calendar is if another member, either talks continuously for 10 minutes against the bill, or if 5 members sign on to the fact that they want to bump the bill. That happened to us last session. So everything was going really, really smoothly. We were making good time. We had so much support. But once our bill was heard on local, we had we'll say feisty member who's not, I will say no longer there, oppose our bill. And he talked for 10 straight minutes against the bill. And one of the things that's amazing to see is that 10 minutes of talking ended up taking almost an hour, because all of the allies behind our bill went to the floor and interrupted him with questions, trying to run out the clock on his allotted 10 minutes. So despite his objection, or actually we did get popped from the local calendar, were sent back to the regular calendar. Our bill came up again, and therefore, despite his objection, which popped us off of local, we were still able to pass the bill on the floor and get it over to the next chamber. That might be very confusing. Don't worry about it, but you know, it's something you have to think about. Is people will use every trick in the book to oppose a bill that they want to stop, even if it means using the Senate or House rules to manipulate the voting process. Inject a poison pill is really the last step of this. This is like playing dirty. I am not going to lie to you. But if you know that a bill is moving forward and you have serious concerns or objections to the bill, it's possible that making a powerful friend using old-fashioned persuasion can allow you the opportunity to amend the bill, pass an amendment to the bill that would ultimately kill the bill in its entirety, because whatever you added to that bill is not palatable for that body. So a lot of the issues that you consider controversial and that usually divide both houses, those will be often the bills that people will try to use to insert a poison pill. So, whether it's increasing Medicaid funding or, doing something that the body is largely opposed to, you can inject that in the bill and sometimes it'll be enough to kill it. So that's all discouraging news. But again, if you anticipate these challenges, you can work strategically throughout the interim and during your bill process to make sure that you check the box off each one of them and have a strategy to get through it if one of these things should occur. So, okay, how do you craft that strategy? So as an advocate or an advocacy organization, I think it's very important to look backwards to determine prior session pitfalls. What this means is, well, here's an example. In the 85th legislative session, which was in 2017, we filed a bill that sought to provide transition services for a youth exiting a juvenile justice facility and attempting to re-enroll into their school campus. So obviously we want students, as soon as they are able, to go back into school, be engaged in the community, advance academically, and really prevent that school to prison pipeline by not missing the opportunity to enroll in school and returning to the campus, to the communities, which did not set them up for success originally. So we filed this bill in 2017. We made great progress on it, but ultimately the clock did run out. So we came back, we did a lot of work in the interim. We met with constituency groups, advocacy groups, everyone that we really could find to let us know how things were working, what they would like to see in the bill, and more tangible steps that would actually benefit youth going through this process more effectively than what we had originally proposed. So we came back during the 86th legislative session. We refiled the bill, but it was a better bill. We learned from our mistakes in the past legislative session and amended the bill accordingly. And this version of the bill did make it through. So, take lessons learned from previous session, whether or not they're yours, and try to use them as you're looking to write your bill for your current session. I mean, this doesn't have to include specifically your bill. You can see certain trends that bills written with a fiscal note are unlikely to pass, and therefore you can try to eliminate a fiscal note from the bill you write. And you can know that certain topics are more sensitive and, have more difficulty passing through the chamber. And again, try to work around, either eliminate those potential roadblocks or rewrite the policy in a way that would potentially ameliorate the concern. So look around also to understand what the tone of the body is. So again, it's what is the Republican versus Democratic makeup, what bills are being focused on in a particular legislative session. I always say that the legislature is completely reactive. And usually during a given interim, you will find the legislature saying their main focus is and then it'll switch 4 or 5 times depending on current events. For example, during the 2019 legislative session, Harvey was the first disaster that the legislature immediately knew would have to be considered. And we worked for months crafting a strategy to support communities who had lived through Hurricane Harvey. And then ultimately, we had the Santa Fe shooting, the Santa Fe high school shooting, occur in May, ahead of the legislative session. And that became the first school shooting on a Texas public school campus. And it immediately turned the legislature's focus to safe and supportive campuses. So luckily for the work we do, the work that we created for Harvey really still applied. We just transferred a little bit of the language. And so we were all set to go. But remember, the legislature will look around about what's happening in their community to determine what their priorities are. So right now it's COVID-19. We are looking at trauma that was endured not only by these recent storms and the Santa Fe high school shooting, but also in our most recent energy failure / Texas freeze. They'll also be looking at redistricting that has not a lot to do with any specific interest. It is something to do or that the legislature has to do every 10 years. And it's usually a nightmare and a process you don't want to be involved in, but they do have to do that. And that is coming during this legislative session. And so you'll see that the majority of bills passed relate to one of those issues. You'll also note that because the bills pass relating to those priority issues, if your bill can contain some type of thread attaching it back to one of those priorities, you will probably have a more successful session. And then finally, look forward to understand the direction of the legislative body. I'll talk about this in terms of mental health again, because it's what I'm familiar with. As I've shown you in that chart, we have seen the number of bills addressing mental health increasing steadily throughout several legislative sessions. So we know that as mental health is really finally becoming a part of community conversations and national conversations, we are seeing that reflected in legislation filed. So whereas some bills relating to mental health wouldn't even be considered, in past years, we now know that there's a window of opportunity based upon trends that we've seen that we actually could move forward a mental health bill, because that is the direction that we see the legislature moving toward. That applies to many things, not just mental health, but if you can look at an issue and try to track what the trend is for the legislature in terms of positively prioritizing that particular issue, I think that that's a good indicator that you could be successful in presenting a bill in that space. One more section of things to consider, and I've really already gone through almost all of these during the presentation, but let's go over them again, because this is really the heart of what you need to know if you are filing a bill. Time. I've said this a million times now. You have to watch the clock. There are deadlines throughout the legislative session that need to very much work into your strategy about how the pacing of your advocacy efforts should go. Authors. Again, find someone who represents your area. They're more likely to support a constituent. Look at the committee in which you believe your bill will be heard, and try to persuade one of those committee members to sign on to your bill because you know that, if they have skin in the game, that committee member is more likely to try to pass that bill out of their committee. Two other things that's very important in the legislature when determining authors. It is critical to form a team of authors that is truly bipartisan. You want to have a good mix of Republicans and Democrats. So remember that to get that mix, you have to write a bill that is has a larger perspective than kind of your actual specific view upon how the issue should go. That doesn't mean compromise what you believe in or the work you're doing, but really look at it as how a law would be successfully impacted in a way that both sides of the aisle could be comfortable with. If you don't have bipartisan membership on your bill, then it's very unlikely that it'll pass through either body. So really think about trying to make it something that you can build a coalition behind with each party. The second thing is that region matters. I will tell you that Houston and Dallas are sort of hated by the legislature because they're huge metropolitan areas, and simply because of the size of the area and the population of the area, giving them money, even if you're doing a statewide allocation, they take up a huge chunk of any resources you're able to authorize. People are less likely to vote for policies that would really only benefit urban areas or would really be have those resources given throughout the state soaked up by those urban areas. We'll also see the differences about focus areas and issues in play for cities are incredibly different than some of those in smaller communities and rural communities. There are obviously different needs for just different communities. Those communities have different resources available to them. They live in different climates, and there needs to be thought given to a solution that would make sense for Houston and also make sense for Wichita Falls. So really think broadly about the scope of your bill and make sure that it's not too focused on a singular issue that's so narrow, it would likely be focused only upon an urban area and, especially not directly affecting one city only. There are opportunities to do that at other levels of government, and I would recommend doing so because I think it would be more successful than trying to get statewide approval on a local issue. This is just the map to reinforce this. Texas is huge. We all know that. But so really consider how to build a team that is not only bipartisan, but that represents areas and populations across the state. If you can also work with advocates, if you'll partner with other advocacy organizations to draft and advocate for a certain piece of legislation, it is fantastic if the group you partner with represents a different area than your organization works with. We are very lucky at Mental Health America of Greater Houston. All of Mental Health America's Texas affiliates have signed on to our legislative agenda. So when we talk to legislators from across the state, we say that not only do we represent the views of MHA Houston, but also MHA of Greater Dallas, MHA of Tarrant County, MHA of Southeast Texas, and MHA of Annalee. And that really has benefited us. And while it might not seem critical, it it can significantly change how you move forward. So don't keep that, don't forget to keep that place in mind. So make sure you're working against the schedule of the legislature presented to you. All of the dates are available for all of the deadlines. Time is your enemy, so get things done as early as you can, from bill filing to getting authors to preparing for a hearing. You want as much time to do that as possible. To do that, you need to select authors who will fight for your bill. So again, if that's someone who represents you, someone who you know is passionate about the issue, if it's someone on the committee which you think you'll be working with, or if there's someone in a position of power who can get behind this bill and push externally, that's all going to help you. And remember to do bipartisan partnerships, and consider the diversity of the state, both demographically and geographically. So that's about all. I know that was a lot to cover. We are always available for questions. I put my email at the end of this presentation. I know that you can reach out to Gustavo with questions as well. It's not an easy process, but it is incredibly important. And I can tell you that even before I worked particularly in the advocacy space, it always made me feel better to try and engage in the process in some way, because it really does connect you to government and make you feel that you're having an impact on the communities in which you live. So I encourage you to participate in any way you see possible, whether it's following bills you support, following organizations' legislative agendas you support, making calls to your legislators, sending emails to your legislators, or even possibly testifying for a specific bill you support or against a bill that you oppose. You can also send written testimony on either side to the bill when it's being heard. And then when you're ready to file a bill about something you're very passionate, do it, and just really do it methodically and come up with a good strategy that you feel positive about from the beginning. All right, well, good luck. Again, we're here for questions, and we'll be updating you soon. Thanks.